y'all. I'm Jamie Lynn Sigler, a mom, actor, and advocate. I know how overwhelming it can be trying to decide which treatment is right for you. I've been there. But you should know you're not alone. You can do this. Start with some research, talk to the community, and most importantly, don't be afraid to ask your doctor questions. You might find results that speak for themselves. That's how I landed on Kesimpta. Ask your doctor if Kesimpta, ofatumumab, could be right for you. You can check out the details at kesimpta.com.
It's extraordinary what people say they saw at Ford's Theater that night. John Wilkes Booth was a megastar.
The American political climate has always been rife with division, but even juxtaposed against today's polarized environment, it has never been nearly as divided as it was during the Civil War. I'm Alec Baldwin. This is a story that shows how the lines are so often blurred between hero and villain, immortality and infamy, justice and vengeance, and how in that respect nothing has changed today. Listen to The Ides of April, starting July 23rd, wherever you get your podcasts.
Pie in the Sky Media. This series contains adult language and descriptions of graphic violence throughout. Listener discretion is advised.
But for him breaking his rules and picking a victim in Anchorage where he lived, he broke his own rules. That's what got him caught.
Welcome back to Criminal Mischief with Carolyn and Brandon. You're listening to episode 91, part 2 of Monster.
I just told them right away what was going on.
Were they cooperative at first, at least, both of them?
Yeah, pretty shocked.
I'm sure.
People never expected stuff to happen.
On last week's episode, we went over the kidnapping, rape, and murder of 18-year-old Samantha Koenig. If you haven't already, please go back and listen to part 1, where we ended the episode with this gut punch of a clip, where Israel Keyes intimates he has more victims.
Are there other parts to this story, either before or after?
Yeah, well, like I said, it's not the whole story.
Okay. Well, you told me you wanted to talk later about how you killed her, but there's other parts to this.
I have lots more stories to tell if you're interested.
This admission by Keyes, that he has more stories to tell, implied what investigators already believed, that Israel Keyes was a serial killer, and that Samantha was not his first victim. During that confession, his confidence was galling. His meticulous nature and planning belied a cunning intelligence and a hard truth. When he said he'd been 2 different people for 14 years. So just who was Israel Keyes? And they knew part of that answer could be found in his childhood. Israel Keyes was born in Utah in January of 1978. His parents, Heidi and Jeff, would have 10 children, and all of their babies would be delivered at home by Jeff, because the couple didn't believe in modern medicine. Israel was the second child and firstborn son. None of the Keyes children would have birth certificates or social security numbers. Heidi and Jeff didn't believe in government interference, and none of their children would attend school. When Israel Keyes was a little boy, his parents decided to leave the Mormon religion, and they moved to Colville, Washington, where they lived outside of a small town in the woods, away from society. Their small cabin didn't have heat, plumbing, or electricity. They were completely isolated and off the grid. The Keyes family would become fundamentalist Christians, and they joined a white supremacist church called the Ark. Jeff, the father, was gone a lot working, and from a young age, Israel was looked upon as the man of the house. His siblings adored him. However, those outside the family would describe Israel as a loner who was awkward. During his adolescent years, Israel had a secret life. He knew from a young age that he was different from everybody else. He loved hunting animals, burglarizing homes, stealing guns, starting fires, and torturing and killing animals for pleasure. Even though Keyes didn't go to school, he was an avid reader and was extremely industrious. In 1998, he would earn his GED expressly so he could enlist in the Army when he was 20 years old. He had signed up for a 3-year stint and was a model soldier. After his service, Israel Keyes would become a father in 2001. In 2007, he and his daughter would move to Alaska. This was the basic history that law enforcement was able to piece together, because pretty much from the very beginning of the interrogations, Israel Keyes made it clear that he would not talk about his parents or his family life. And so authorities pored over his cell phone records, financial statements, travel logs, and from these, they understood what they were dealing with, that Israel Keyes had traveled across the country, specifically in Washington, California, Wyoming, Texas, Vermont, and New York, which meant he could have victims anywhere. If you'll recall in last week's episode, Israel Keyes had made demands that if they wanted to know what had happened to Samantha Koenig, the death penalty had to be taken off the table. And he insisted that the FBI do all that they could to mitigate what was released to the media regarding anything that he would confess to. But after he confesses to Samantha's murder and shares where her remains were, he had a new set of demands. If the FBI wanted him to spill more information about his crimes, the price for admission had gone up. By early April 2012, he tells the FBI, quote, "I'm not going to talk about those things unless I know that I'm going to get what I want, an execution date." Keyes would say, if you wanted to know about his victims, which he alluded were many, he needed the FBI's assurances that they would do all that they could to get him the death penalty within a year's time. The investigators hedged. They would say that their bosses needed something more if they were going to try to break protocol with the death penalty. And it would be hard to keep his confessions away from the media. They were like, you gotta give us something or we can't do anything for you. And Keyes relents. He says, all right, I'll give you 2 bodies and a name. Bill and Lorraine Courier. In June of 2011, the middle-aged couple who lived a quiet life in Vermont had last been seen leaving their jobs the night of June 11th, and then they vanished. The case was still unsolved. Keyes would say that what happened to the Couriers was a long time coming, something he'd been planning since April of 2009, when he traveled from Alaska to Vermont, where he would bury one of his so-called kill caches by the Winooski River.
He had these kill kits around the country in these 5-gallon, these orange Home Depot buckets. He would put tape and rope and sometimes a stun gun or something, kind of a weapon and things, everything he needed to do an abduction kill. And that's why they call them kill kits.
If you'll recall, that's retired FBI Special Agent Bobby Chacon. You heard him in last week's episode.
I spent 27 years in the FBI, and now I'm a retired agent and screenwriter.
And you're also an attorney, right?
I was an attorney, yeah, before I came in the FBI. So I'm an attorney, I have my law degree. Yeah, and now I screenwrite for television and movies.
So, Keyes buries this kill kit in Vermont in 2009. And remember, he lives in Alaska. Then, 2 years later, on June 2nd, 2011, he takes a flight from Anchorage to Chicago. He rents a car and heads east for Vermont, where he intends to murder someone or a couple. He has no idea who he's going to kill. 5 days later, Keyes arrives in Essex, Vermont. He checks into a hotel and then goes to dig up that kill cache.
I wanted to dig up those guns that I had buried there. They had been there for a few years, and I wanted to check on them, make sure they weren't full of water, and found the guns, brought them back up to the motel room, and worked on them for a while, getting everything working again.
Now he's ready to scout for victims.
I was actually looking for a guy, and there was pouring rain, big lightning storm, and there was a guy who came in. He was in a yellow V-dub bug, newer one. He almost got it that night. If he hadn't got out of the car. He'd been about 5 seconds slower getting out of his car, going into the apartment. He would have been the one that night. But like I said, it was raining, so I walked out of this little wooded area, and I was walking up behind his car, and he kind of, or walking along the line of cars towards his car, and he kind of jumped out, and he had like a newspaper over his head, and he ran into the apartment to keep from getting wet. But yeah, that would have been my first choice, I guess. But I was waiting for the right opportunity. So when that didn't work out, I wasn't that worried about it. I just waited till later.
Keyes goes back to his hotel and waits for it to get dark. The hunt is on again. He randomly walks in a neighborhood, but he's looking for a very specific set of circumstances.
And then he starts walking around the neighborhood casing for a house that he's going to abduct somebody from. He said he didn't like houses that had dogs and that had kids. If there was kids' playground, like swing sets or something in the yard, stayed away from that. If there was a dog, he stayed away from that.
Then I found that house, and it was exactly what I was looking for. I think I even had it pegged down just from looking at the outside that it was probably an older couple, just because of the way they had their backyard set up. They had like a swimming pool and a deck and a barbecue, and it just looked like a, like older couple that didn't have kids kind of house. So I knew there was probably only one room in the house that was being used as the bedroom.
Bill and Lorraine Currier own a white ranch-style house. It's isolated and near woods. Sometime after midnight, Keyes cuts the phone line, and using a crowbar, he smashes a window, then reaches in his hand to unlock the door. It all happened so fast. The Curriers heard the noise, and as they were still coming out of sleep, trying to understand what was happening, a masked man is upon them. Wielding a gun, he quickly restrains them with zip ties.
Once I was actually in the house, I was probably in the bedroom within 5 or 6 seconds from the time the glass broke. So,
were they still asleep when you got to there, or do you think they heard that?
They heard it, but they were just barely. I mean, they were just
wondering what it was.
Waking up, yeah.
So you don't do anything, or to prevent them from calling or anything like that, or using the phone or anything like that?
Well, I cut the phone lines outside the house.
Oh, okay.
I cut the phone lines as soon as I picked the house, because usually if there's an alarm system, it'll trigger the alarm.
Oh, I see. So you could watch and see if
right. So I cut the phone lines, and like I said, the neighbor next door, he was still up. He kept coming out and smoking, but I knew I wasn't going to break into the house until I was sure that the neighbors were asleep.
Were they cooperative at first, at least, both of them?
Yeah. Pretty shocked.
I'm sure.
People never expected stuff to happen.
Do you remember what you told them?
I just, it's like a blitz attack. You just make sure they know right away who's in charge, and immediately tie them up, tell them what the rules are, that there's no talking unless I talk to them. They don't move unless I tell them to move, and did their hands behind their back and had them, pulled everything off the bed and got their hands and their feet together with cable ties.
He then forces them to walk into the garage and into their own car, a Saturn sedan, where he further restrains them. And once he makes sure that they're secured in their places, he gets behind the wheel and begins driving them. He already knows where he's going. It's an abandoned farmhouse, which he'd scoped out just for this purpose. He separates the couple, brings Bill down to the basement of that farmhouse, and ties him to a stool. He then goes back to the Saturn where he left Lorraine.
She had somehow broke the cable ties on her hands and on her feet and got out of the car. She was almost to the road when I came out of the basement, and she saw me come out. She started running, and I tackled her on the lawn and roughed her up a little bit and tied her back up and took her upstairs and had her lay down on I had the mattresses. I think I had already had them set up from the day before when I had the house. I had them thrown down in the middle of the room upstairs. Had her lie down on the mattresses. I gave up on the cable ties. I don't know, it must have been a bad batch or something. They kept breaking, and so I didn't trust them anymore. So I took duct tape and made handcuffs out of that, and with her hands behind her back. And then once I had her laying down on the bed, I took the nylon rope and ran it under between the mattresses, under the one she was on and on top of the other one, and then did a trucker's hitch and cinched her down to the mattress.
Bill interrupts Keys, who can hear him rustling around in the basement from upstairs, prompting Keys to head back down to the basement.
She was like, "Where's my wife? What's going on?" And I was like, I told you you're not going to cooperate. You're going to do it the hard way. And came back downstairs, and he was standing at the bottom of the stairs in the basement still. It was like, he didn't have any light, but I could tell when I came down the stairs, like he was trying to figure out some way to fight me. He was like feeling around for something to hit me with, and I came back down the stairs and I saw that. So you're still not going to cooperate, and I had the gun out in front of me, like pointed from the hip, had my headlamp on. He saw the gun and he started to say something, and it just pissed me off, and I just started pulling the trigger.
How much time with her?
I just kept pulling the trigger. I pulled as fast as I could until the magazine was empty.
So 10?
Yeah, he didn't. He was still standing when the last shot hit him.
Where did the shots hit him? Mostly.
It seems like 2 of them might have hit him in the forehead, or not forehead, but the forearms. So like his arms were crossed in front of him, and then it seems like at least 1 or 2 rounds, like the last rounds that hit him, he was starting to fall. It seems like they might have hit him in the neck or in the head, but for the most part, I think it was like the chest area. I think he was in shock. It was like, I think he went into shock because I don't think he was dead. But he hit the ground, and I knew he wasn't getting back up again. He was bleeding quite a bit.
Keys leaves Bill, dead or dying. Keys would rape Lorraine twice before bringing her down to the basement where he'd left Bill and strangles her.
The second time I raped her, I had choked her. I think she passed out for a little while, and then, so she was, like by the time I walked her downstairs, she was a little bit out of it. I don't know if she really knew what was going on at that point. I had my leather gloves on, and I think I took a piece of the rope and stood behind her while she was sitting on that bench and used it like a garrote and strangled her.
Okay, I remember my first real taste of the internet, and it didn't go too smoothly. I was ignorant to the fact that posting a comment wasn't only for the person whose page I was on. In short order, I received a phone call. "Hey, Brandon, you know everyone on the planet can see what you wrote, right?" Oops. And being Gen X, I didn't grow up online, but my kids have. I can only imagine the things they've seen and read, and that's with my wife and I keeping them on a really short digital leash and policing their devices. And still, one of my kids was subjected to a rather prolonged, kind of abusive online relationship. It's tough out there, for them and for us. That's why Gab is such a game changer. They make smartphones and watches for kids, tweens, and teens. No social media apps, no internet browser, but with GPS tracking. But hold on, it's still tech that kids want. Unlimited talk and text, along with over 100 non-social media apps that kids love, with easy-to-use parental control options and built-in content filters that add an additional layer of protection to stop harmful content before it reaches your kid. Like I said, Gab is a game changer, and I can't recommend them enough. This is the absolute best time to check them out because right now, Gab is offering $25 off any device to new customers with no contract required. That's $25 off any Gab smartphone or smartwatch. Just go to gab.com/mischief. That's where you'll get the best deal. That's Gab, GABB.com/mischief. Gab.com/mischief.
This Friday, Jamie Lee Curtis and Lindsay Lohan are back to switch things up in Disney's Freakier Friday.
Totally, yes.
It's an absolute riot, and the only movie that can be described as
so much weirder than the last time. What last time?
It's the frequel.
You ready?
We've been waiting for.
That absolutely slays. What deeply out of touch old person came up with that? You did. Wow.
Don't miss the comedy event of the summer for all ages. Disney's Freakier Friday in theaters this Friday. Get tickets now. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested.
It's Wednesday Addams. I see you're trying to distract yourself from your own banal thoughts. Let me help. Here's a recording thing made of my latest root canal.
Wednesday, Season 2, begins August 6th, only on Netflix.
Hey all, I'm Jamie Lynn Sigler, a mom, actor, and advocate. I know how overwhelming it can be trying to decide which treatment is right for you. I've been there. But you should know you're not alone. You can do this. Start with some research, talk to the community, and most importantly, don't be afraid to ask your doctor questions. You might find results that speak for themselves. That's how I landed on Kesimpta. Ask your doctor if Kesimpta, ofatumumab, could be right for you. You can check out the details at kesimpta.com.
Keyes would tell investigators that he left the couriers in the basement after he placed them inside of plastic bags and poured Drano on their bodies. He then piled debris on top of them and left. When the FBI goes to check out the house, they find out that it's been demolished.
The bodies, unless they got moved around when they demolished it, they're going to be in the southeast corner of the basement.
And I know they're in the plastic bags you described to us. Are they looking, how many plastic bags should they be looking for?
4.
All right.
The bodies were completely covered, and they were underneath a lot of debris that I piled on top of them, like wood and trash. And if they had bothered to pull everything out of the basement, they probably would have found them. So I'm guessing they just buried everything where it was.
Authorities would search a nearby landfill for 12 weeks, but the courier's remains were never found. The FBI's inability to recover the courier's remains would bother Keyes, not for remorse or guilt, but because he felt he'd given up a double homicide for nothing. He was losing faith in the FBI because they seemed no closer to giving him what he wanted, the death penalty within a year.
And I'm willing to help you get what you need, but there are some things that I want out of it too. Now, if I don't get, I'm in jail regardless. I'm in custody indefinitely regardless. So, I know you're going to do your job with or without my help. My point of view is that if you can do it with my help, and if you are willing to work with me on the few things that I want or would like to see happen, then can make your job easier.
Investigators continue to have conversations with Keyes, while at the same time they're building a comprehensive timeline of his life and travels as a way to connect him to unsolved cases. The fact that this would be something difficult for them is something that Keyes seemed to really enjoy.
What did you make of seeing this kill kit? I mean, it's we can say it rolls off the tongue, kill kit, but to actually see it, I mean, I've seen pictures of it.
Yeah.
This is really the thought, meticulous.
Yeah, I mean, how that impacts an investigation is that, if we find a victim and the crime scene says, okay, she has this kind of tape on her, this kind of chains, whatever, and we've all seen it in other shows, other murders. You go to the local Home Depot, hey, I want the purchases the last 3 months, who's ever purchased these items, and sure enough, they get a hit. Oh, 3 months ago, somebody bought this, and this off your list. Well, let's look at the videotape from 3 months ago, whatever. He knew that if he bought that stuff years in advance from somewhere else, that type of investigative avenue would be a dry hole for us. It's worked in other cases, many other cases. We've often seen, right, those videos from Home Depot of the person buying the things that they used. Keyes knew that. He was smarter not to do that. And so he had these kill kits that couldn't be traced in any kind of recent purchases, any kind of recent area. When I first was in the FBI, I was working the mafia in New York City and drug gangs, and I did so many RICO cases with murders in them that I went to the homicide school, the NYPD homicide school. My brother and father were both NYPD detective sergeants. And so one of the things they tell you, the Venn diagram. So you put a circle. The first circle is the victim's life and the victim's world, all the people in the victim's world. The second circle is the geographic area where either the crime took place or the victim was disposed of. And where those two circles overlap is your suspect pool. So the person's either going to be attached to the victim, or if they're picking random victims, they're probably going to be attached to the geographic area where either the crime was committed or or the person was dumped or disposed of. And so Keyes knew to stay random to his victim and random to his geographic location. The Couriers, 50 years old, married couple, right? Samantha, 19-year-old, single young woman. There's no victimology there. It would make it very difficult for profilers to draw up a profile when there's not a kill zone, like, oh, this guy always kills in industrial parks, or he always looks for young women, blonde, whatever. So Keyes was very successful at keeping out of either of those two circles. It's what made him very successful for 14 years, killing people. But for him breaking his rules and picking a victim in Anchorage where he lived, he broke his own rules. That's what got him caught.
On May 23, 2012, Keyes was brought into a packed federal courtroom. He was bound by leg irons and handcuffed to a belly chain. As he was seated at the defense table, he had 4 armed guards on each side, and in the back of the courtroom stood about a half-dozen U.S. Marshals. They believed they were prepared for anything, and they were right to be worried. As Keyes' attorney was speaking to the court, he jumped up from his chair and made a run for it, hopping over chairs and rows. Finally, guards were able to take him down just before he got to the doors of the courtroom, but it was close. They would have to tase him to get him to the ground. An investigation would reveal that, against orders, guards had been giving him pencils. He would take a piece of the pencil and, using his teeth, whittle little pieces of wood into lockpicks. That's what he'd use to pick the handcuffs and leg chains. He also used the plastic wrapper from the daily sandwiches that he received for lunch to tie together his leg irons to give the impression that they were still locked in place. The next day, he'd be interviewed.
I mean, come on, let's face it. Yeah, what happened yesterday? Ooh, I'm a bad guy. I tried to escape, but let's be honest. Nobody really thought I was a good guy before that, so... It's not like being escaping suddenly makes me untrustworthy. I was kind of untrustworthy before that, so...
Over 7 months, Israel Keyes would voluntarily grant 24 interviews with various members of law enforcement after his arrest in Texas. He would tease investigators with details, but stop short from confessing to any more murders. But during this time, he would talk about his life. For example, how he used a coat hanger to brand the back of his neck with the image of a pentagram.
Which one was your first one?
It was the one on my neck, on the back of my neck, the pentagram.
Okay. What brand came after that one, after the one on your neck?
Probably the one on my arm, the IZ.
Did you do that one yourself?
Yeah, most of them I did myself. I think I had to have the one on my back done a couple times to get it to stick.
Which one's on your back?
The pentagram.
Okay.
But yeah, the rest of them I mostly did myself. With a cigar? Or... No, with a coat hanger.
You have an upside-down cross, right?
Yeah.
Is that one that you did yourself too?
Yeah, that was one of the last ones I did, I think.
How long ago was that?
Maybe 7 or 8 years ago.
So what was the meaning, because that's after you're out of all the satanic stuff and all that, so what was the meaning of that one for you?
I mean, I considered myself an atheist for a long time, but that doesn't mean, I still have issues with it, so.
He would also discuss his Satanism.
My philosophy changed on why I wanted to do it and stuff. From how did that change? From what to what? Well, at the time I thought that I was just into that whole Satanist symbolism type stuff, and I thought that was the reason I was doing it, and then over the next few years I realized that I didn't really even believe in that stuff. I just at the time I was just using that as justification or a reason or something. That wasn't really the reason I wanted to do it. It was just because I wanted to do it. And then so once I kind of came to terms with that there wasn't a higher power, if you will, that I was going to do it for. It was just something I wanted to do that made it a lot easier.
So you weren't doing it for the devil or Satan or...
That's what but at the time, that stuff meant a lot to me, or I thought it did. I was just really pissed off in general at the time. Like the whole religious upbringing, typical teenage anger issues, whatever. But nobody ever saw that side of me, everybody. That's why I did things like that, because it would just, not like I had a temper, I would blow up at people, but it was still there. It would come out when I did those kind of things, when I did robberies or burglaries and stuff. I knew I wasn't going to get caught for it, I just burn things, break things.
How did you know you weren't going to get caught for it? You just felt that way based on your planning? You seem pretty good at those things. I mean,
I just read a lot of crime books.
Keyes would say that he learned from his mistakes, that he first got the idea that he could do exactly what he'd been fantasizing of doing for years, sexually assaulting and murdering a person. In the late 1990s, he would attack his first victim after his family moves to Oregon.
Was in a new area, it seemed a lot more feasible just because it was, like nobody knew me. It was all strangers and everybody was really friendly. It was like one of those situations where I just knew it would be really easy.
He would tell investigators that day he had lost his nerve, that he'd intended to rape and murder his first victim, but after he sexually assaulted her, he'd let her go.
I think I was only maybe 18 at the time.
So did you get away with something there?
Yeah, never even got reported. I mean, I didn't, like I said, I didn't have the nerve to, take it to the next level.
He would later say that he would never let a victim go again. It was a hard lesson, but he believed it only made him stronger because he realized that the only way that he was going to murder and not get caught was to kill strangers.
But if I was going to do that kind of stuff, it had to just be complete strangers from then on. It couldn't be anyone who knew me or who had seen me around the person, or it shouldn't even, like, the whole thing that happened in Oregon freaked me out because I could almost see the beach from where I worked every day, and it was just too close to home. And I just realized that if I kept doing stuff like that, it was only a matter of time before I got caught.
Keyes would tell authorities that after he got out of the military, it wasn't long before he killed someone, his first supposed victim. Who that was, he wouldn't say. But he did describe his process, how he would search the internet for small towns across the country that had multiple routes in and out, that he assumed that these places would also have small and inexperienced law enforcement because there weren't a lot of crimes in these places. And it's here where he would also potentially hide his kill caches. When he was in town scoping it out, he'd look for old abandoned properties and also conduct reconnaissance for future attacks, and he would reveal that he had also robbed banks, which meant part of his mission was to identify the number of surveillance cameras a potential bank that he might want to rob might have. He also wanted to know how close the bank was to the police department.
Armed robberies, most days that's better, especially if it's like a small town. I remember the first one I did, I was freaked out, and but then once I got in there and actually was doing it, I remember one of the ladies at the counter, she was about the same age as my mom, and just the look on her face, I was like, I still think about that.
She couldn't believe it?
Not just that, but she was just terrified.
After 7 months of interrogations, where Israel Keyes had confessed to being a serial killer, rapist, arsonist, burglar, and bank robber, he'd lost patience with the federal government. He hadn't been given an execution date, and because he had access to the internet, he could see that his identity had been released and his crimes were being discussed in the media. Law enforcement had no idea just how disillusioned he'd become, because on the night of December 1st, 2012, Israel Keyes would commit suicide. He would slit his wrist with a disposable razor and also fashioned a noose out of a bedsheet, which he then tied around his neck and foot to strangle himself shortly after 10 o'clock that night. And Keyes would take his secrets with him. He would leave only one clue. He would draw 12 skulls using his own blood with the words, "We are one." Authorities believe 11 of those skulls represent his victims, and the 12th one is Keyes himself. They would also find a blood-soaked 4-page suicide note. But according to authorities, nothing within those pages would lead them to any of his other victims. So out of the 11 victims, authorities believe they have identified 4. Samantha Koenig, Bill and Lorraine Courier, and 48-year-old Deborah Feldman from New Jersey. Deborah was last seen at her apartment in April of 2009. Her body has never been recovered. But when agents showed Keyes her picture, he would say, "I don't want to talk about her yet."
His MO is like a little bit like the Night Stalker, where he didn't have anybody was fair game. I mean, it sounds like strangling his victims was his preferred method because he liked to watch them, the lights go out, right? But like, you can't, how are they going to try to identify potential, unsolved cases connecting to him when it just...
You can't. I mean, I know there's a lot of this going on right now. There's a lot of dedication to trying to find his additional victims. And a lot of it has to do with, okay, he was assigned in the Army to this place, or he lived over here for a couple of years. Do we have missing people in that area? But he was successful enough in doing exactly what you said, not having a victimology, not having, that kind of thing. It leads me to believe that he was getting so much joy and psychosexual satisfaction out of the hunt, out of burying those kill kits, knowing they're there. I'm sure the whole flight from Anchorage to Chicago, and then the whole drive from Chicago to Vermont before he killed the courier, so he didn't even know who he was going to kill yet. He was having a psychosexual fantasy about it, which lasted for him days. So the murder and the sexual assault and murder at the end is kind of just the finale of a very long series of events that is feeding his psychosexual needs. Whereas some of these killers, it comes on sudden and they have to go out and they have to kill right away. And a lot of times they get caught because of that spontaneity. But Keyes was not like that. Keyes, I think the lead up is what was great for him. The lead up, all of that at the time, walking around that neighborhood, trying to pick out a house, all of that was stimulating to him in that evil way. And so that's what made him a little different than, if you look at the Long Island serial killer, he had a type, right? He had a very definite type. Keyes didn't have that. He had the Long Island serial killer, if it's true, he's innocent of proven guilty, but if he's the guy, he had a very definite area of operation, right? A very definite kill zone. Now that there may be more kill zones we find out in that case eventually, but geographically he was tied to some of those victims. And so Keyes was different in that respect, and very different from most of the serial killers that were out there.
Stick around for our bonus episode up next. In our bonus content, my co-host Brandon Morgan and I go over the case. You'll hear details that didn't make it into the show. And if you have a minute, head on over to Apple Podcasts and rate and review the show. It really helps. And as always, thanks for listening. From Cloud 10, Criminal Mischief is a pie-in-the-sky production recorded in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. We're produced by Brandon Morgan and myself. Music by Soundstripe. I'm Carolyn Osorio, your writer and host.